Oh, community.
Community.
Community is...
What's it mean to have
I
community?
don't even know. Community is such a hard word now.
It needs to be a place where people don't have to wear a mask, don't have to pretend. There's a place where you experience life with one another and know you're accessible.
Man, it is hard to define, isn't it?
We need community.
If you're not known, you cannot be loved.
But we're definitely coming at this from different places.
I'm Daniel Powell. You're listening to the Grounded Presence Podcast, where together we're exploring a deeply rooted existence. And we're in season 2 of the podcast, which is carrying the title Craving Community. And today I continue my conversation from last time with Rusty Gates. And if you missed that last episode, you should definitely check it out, as it'll give you a little more context for this episode. But if you need a quick recap, Rusty and I met about 6 years ago at a small church in Denver, Colorado. And this was the church called Bloom. And I tried to avoid mentioning it by name in the last episode, but that cat quickly got out of the bag. But Bloom, this wasn't your typical church. It was a place for both Rusty and myself that exemplified what deep, rich community could and should be. And Rusty was actually on the pastoral staff at this church, and he had his hands directly involved in creating the space where this style of community could thrive. And Rusty is very talented, and he's got some great insight from his experiences. But after talking with Rusty, and listening back on this conversation, what I realized is that I think many of us, including myself, often talk about community in this big, kind of ambiguous, conceptual, almost professorial way, How do we create community? Scratching the beard, thinking community. But what I've realized after talking to Rusty is that you can't create community. It's not something that gets created. But what you can do is you can practice hospitality. And hospitality is the fertile soil where community can grow. Well, Rusty, he might not want me to say this, but Rusty is a master of hospitality, as you're soon going to find in this conversation. And I hope that when you listen to it, that you take as much away from it as I have, having it and listening to it again myself. So without further ado, let's get right down to it. Here's me and Rusty Gates going at it for round 2. So let's talk some more about tools.
Yeah.
You're on this staff at this church that we both went to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my perspective of you, and the limited knowledge I have of you, is that you're kind of back there, and you're like tinkering with things, trying to figure out how to set up environments so that people connect in like deeper ways, and they come closer. Is that accurate?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think that's one of those things that I always naturally did, and still do, even though I don't necessarily have like a church community that I'm shepherding. Like when we have people over to our house, it's one of my biggest delights and joys to create a space that feels warm and welcoming to people. So, I've got a growing collection of vinyl records, and I'm not a cool hipster. So like, I don't know that I have the coolest music in the world, but I do love the experience of it. I love the tangible aspect of music. And so I'll put on a record, I'll light some candles, I'll pour really good wine or really good whiskey. I have a menu, like I literally have a menu at my house that I've made and laminated that has all of the cocktails that I can make, all of the beers that I have. We typically at any given time have about 4 or 5 different types of water that you can drink at our house. And it's one of my biggest joys in the world to say, come into our space. There's a space for you here. You belong here, and let me treat you. Like, let me Like because here's what would happen. People would come to my house and I would say, can I get you something to drink? And they go, cool. Yeah. What do you have? And then I would list like 27 things and they would get completely overwhelmed. They'd be like, well, I'll have a water. And I was like, well, hold up. Like I've got like 5 types of waters. And they'll go, oh no, like I'll just have tap water. And it would like break my soul. Just like, okay. Like, and so I created this menu where I'd be like, here's everything we have. You don't have to sit here and listen to me ramble off 27 things or more. You take a look and you tell me what strikes your fancy and I'll get it for you. And it does have plain tap water on the menu so that if people actually do want that, they can choose it. But like, I'd be like, well, I've got this wine and I've got this wine and I've got this whiskey and this is that. And so I just like, I want to create that space where people feel warm and welcome and then we can connect. And so in church world, that's a lot of what I was doing and what I love doing. I mean, you know,
hey, well, you know what you've done with your little menu there? You've taken a barrage of information and you've put it into like a little ritual, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you hand somebody something and it's like, here you go.
Yeah.
Choose what you want. You know,
and then
I just kind of like prioritize the person, I think, over the decision.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And prioritize the person over the presentation of what I have. I used to think it was fun and funny to like list off 47 drinks. But like you're saying, like that was a barrage of information that would overwhelm people. But then, yeah, the ritual has actually continued beyond that. So to get into this little like weird thing that I do, people will come in. They usually come to our kitchen because that's just like where people naturally gather. I give them the menu. Hey, anything you want off this menu, you let me know and I'll take care of it. They tell me, I go make it for them or get it for them or whatever it is. And then they have it, and then usually they're like, oh, this is so good, whatever. But then I also have a review book for my bar. So I have a notebook where anytime I give somebody a drink off the menu, they have to leave a review. And it can be any kind of review they want. So it's like, if you want to give me a review out of 5 stars, you can do that. Or if you want to give it a written review, you can do that. Or you can draw a picture or whatever it is. And then it just keeps this record of the people who have been in our house and had drinks and we've shared time with. I'm doing more and more of that, of kind of tracking the history of our space and of our relationships. Like I have a separate notebook that has a page for every board game that we own or have played in our house. And so whenever somebody wins, they get to put, like we keep track of what the game was, who they were, how many points they won with. And then they get to go on like the leaderboard that's in the front of the book. And it's like this dumb little thing, but I don't know, like it's something about like people have been here and I want to remember that. I want to mark that. I think that one of the things that we do see in like the biblical stories is specifically in the Jewish tradition is they have this beautiful practice of commemorating things. And I actually have a tattoo that is a quote from a Jewish rabbi that says, forgetfulness leads to exile and remembrance is the secret of redemption. And so, yeah, like I've got all these things that I'm starting to do now within the community of our home where I'm trying to create a history and a legacy of people have been here. Because I think, again, like down the road, we may not always have those people or we may not always have that home. And I just don't want to forget that we shared really good and meaningful moments together.
That's awesome, man. You got it down.
I don't know, man. Like, there's so much that I do that's bad, and I'm really bad at. Which is what it is. But again, like these are just kind of my natural hardwirings. You know, I don't want to take too much credit for all that. These are just like little things that bring me joy, and so much of who I am is just seek more joy, seek more enjoyment out of life. If something is hard, not necessarily hard, but if something's negative and painful, like let's do less of that and let's just do more things that cause joy and happiness and peace.
I think that's really cool because I think a lot of people might do something, like that, like your menu or whatever, but more out of an energy to like impress,
It probably started there. There's a little bit of that.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. Like I'll own that. Some of that is definitely there. There's always, and I don't know, I'd be interested to know what other extroverts say about this, but.
Let's say this, if I was going to do it, it would all be out of there.
Yeah.
And that's why I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. But I mean, okay, go back to the Bloom thing, right? Again, so much of what I was doing at Bloom was because I thought I was supposed to be this awesome, cool, epic, famous pastor. And so I guess sometimes it's that your motivations don't matter so much, even if it is out of ego. Because like a lot of what I do is out of ego, right? Like if I'm playing this game of can I make someone smile, there is a certain amount of ego in that because I think, oh, I'm awesome. I can make this person smile. But it's still a good thing to make people smile. So I try not to judge the ego side of that too much and just say, well, yeah, like I know I have an ego. I know that pride is a real issue for me. So work on keeping that in check. And yet, that's just the dark side of another coin, right? Like there's a really good side to that too, which is I make people smile. Like I make people feel I will bring levity to serious situations. And that's okay too. Like, so yes, sometimes it's ego being the center of attention. And sometimes it's just about making people feel good. And most times it's a little bit of both. So I don't know. I think you should make a menu. If you want to make a menu, even if you think there's some ego in that, I think you should do it because I think people would get a kick out of it. And that's enough. Like, even if there is some ego in there.
Oh, I love it. Love everything you're saying. Now, it's funny you're talking about the menu because that would help me. I'm somebody who gets overwhelmed with options. So like something that I try to do for myself if I'm going out to a meal with somebody, I'll actually look up all the menu options ahead of time and know what I'm going to order.
Yeah.
So that I can just sit down and be present without a decision.
Yeah.
Kicking my monkey brain into high gear,
Yeah.
you know? But, oh, decisions. Because once I go there, it's really hard to.
But that's really interesting though. I mean, like, I think that it's cool that you have that self-awareness to know like, okay, I know this will be a distraction and I don't want to be distracted. I want to be present. In a world full of distractions, to not get too deep into this, but following the Lenten season is something that I haven't always taken seriously. In some seasons I have, some seasons I haven't. But this season I've really worked on eliminating a lot of distractions that I know that I use as distractions. And essentially what I've come to find is it takes a little bit more work on the front end, but it's made my quality of life so much higher. It's a little more work on the front end, but I'm happier and I'm more content. So I think it's cool for you to be able to have to know that about yourself, to say, hey, this is a distraction and I just want to be present here.
Hey, I'll piggyback off that a little more. Going back to the church stuff, I realized that being preoccupied with God and all that was a distraction from community and relationships for me.
Yeah.
Like it was a wedge rather than a tool, you know? And I think I'm becoming a lot more agile in, being able to deal with people from all walks of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I go into a room of atheists, I'm going to be much more of an atheist to be able to interact with that group of people. Whereas if I go into a room of Christians, I'm going to be a little softer on the religious side of things.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
so it's like my menu of community, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I've got to select which one I'm going to do before. Anyway.
Yeah, no. I mean, we're always I think that if there's anything that as an extrovert I've sharpened really well, it's that thing. It's being all things to all people in some ways, where it's what do you need me to be and how do I communicate with you? And some of that I'll say I know we've chalked a lot of it up to being extroverted, but a lot of that is I was born and I grew up as a kid between worlds. So that is to say, I am half Mexican and half redneck, which is how I always joke whenever I'm in front of people. I always say that's how you ended up with a name like Rusty Joe and get a tan like this. But so those were two very, very different cultures. I had a fully Hispanic Mexican family, and then I had a very white, rural East Texas, and I'd say redneck, but I think that's, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's always the joking word that I can put to that of you kind of know what I'm talking about, Southern folks that hunt and fish and all that. And I never really felt like I belonged to either of those, because for my Hispanic family, I wasn't really raised with a lot of the Mexican traditions. For my more country family, if you will, I was raised in a metropolitan city of Dallas, so I never really belonged in either of those spaces. And then, whenever I entered church world, I was kind of caught between the Lutheran world and the Baptist world. And 500 years ago, well, yeah, about 500 years ago, those people were literally killing each other, and never really felt like I belonged in either one of those. And then there just have been a lot of those, like a lot of like dichotomies where I go, I don't really know where I belong in the midst of this. And then part of that's my parents' divorce, where it's like, well, I have my mom lives over here and my dad lives over here, and those are very different people in different worlds. And so I think being extroverted while also having those experiences has really taught me to do what you're talking about really quickly, where I can shift gears really, really fast. Like, and admittedly has also kind of made me a little successful, like in my business now as a realtor, because I like I have client appreciation events, and sometimes I'm a little nervous about getting all of my clients in one room because they come from such drastically different backgrounds. But it is what it is. Like it's just a testament to like I'm really fortunate to be able to have meaningful relationships with people who are very different.
That's awesome. I want to flip that coin too.
Okay.
I think it's valuable, like for me, to be able to be agile in situations. But, I say that, and that's like not the only game, right? Because I've had experiences where somebody wasn't agile, right? Because to do so would have made them inauthentic,
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of this really like kind of vulnerable moment I had where I was talking about my struggles with the idea of God. It's like there were tears, kind of a group of people, kind of a group therapy setting, right?
Yeah.
And I would refer to like the universe, I just want like the universe to see me, right? I want God to see me, right? But I remember after I did that, a few of the people went around and just like affirmed me, right? And this one man did it in his own language, right? And he just says something like, child of God, but he wasn't imposing it on me. He was using the language that he knows to communicate love.
Yeah.
And it was just, even though I was like so hurt by a lot of maybe my own beliefs of religion, and how they function in my life, it's just such a beautiful and meaningful moment, And even looking back at that, it's like I can feel it in my chest just because it was somebody being themselves and offering it to me. It wasn't somebody trying to be who they think I need them to be. It's just like, I am here. These are the words I have. And
yeah, man.
So yeah, there's beauty. It's just tapping into the moment.
Yeah, man.
I think that's what it's all about.
Well, you talked about flipping it on its head and the other side of that coin. That's probably the biggest criticism that I get. Like I have regularly had close friends of mine now, and throughout life who said, when I met you, I thought you were an asshole. And like a part of that comes off of my extroversion, my energy, all of that like manic tendencies. It does tend to come off inauthentic to people. Like, I don't know the validity of that. Maybe it is or is not true. I think what they'll end up finding is like, there's at least a consistency where it's like, oh, he's always like that. Okay. And that's fine. But it does it does feel like, well, why is he performing? What's he want from me? He's trying to get something from me. And maybe sometimes I am, like, if I'm trying to get you to smile, that is like trying to get something from you, as opposed to just being present and letting you be a person and me being a person. It is a little bit manipulative. And so I think people call me on that, and the people who end up being close to me.
But we're humans. We need to be manipulated.
Oh, yeah.
Because if we're not manipulated, we're never going to move anywhere, right?
Yeah.
There's like this idea I read about emotional contagion, like how you're going to adopt whatever the energy of the person is in the room with you. It can be positive or negative, but it's like the strongest energy.
Yeah.
And from like work situations and stuff, it's going to affect the whole crew.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So it's like, we need really good, like good manipulation, good contagion.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And what's fascinating is, again, time and place, realizing what's appropriate in that moment or in that context. Because in a marriage, it's very different. With my wife, like, she'll come home and she'll have a hard day, and what I want to do is try to bring the energy level up, but it's not helpful, right? Like, sometimes I need to meet her in that moment and just, again, be a person and say, hey, like, it's okay for you to be sad. And that's honestly like a hard lesson for me to learn. It's something that I've been in therapy for. It's something that I've had to really wrestle with, because sadness is a valid emotion and it's an often appropriate emotion. And for me, I always just want to avoid it. And I want to make everybody happy, and I want everybody to be happy all the time, which again may be noble in its intention, but isn't particularly helpful all the time. I've recently rewatched The Office again for like the 1000th time. To me, it's just the show that I can actually like. There aren't many shows I can watch over and over again, but that one is really good because I think what it reveals about community and relationships. And there's a scene in one of the latter seasons, 8th or 9th season, and Jim and Pam are fighting, and there's the big issue, and it's like it's the episodes that everyone hates the most of The Office. Anyway, and like Jim is like just about to leave. He's like, I'm just going to go to Philly. We'll deal with this later. And Pam's like, no, we should like go home. And he's like, we're just going to fight. And she's like, I think we should go home, and I think we should fight. And what's so beautiful about that is, I think, to my definition of community, of saying like, I'm here and I'm not like, I'm sticking around, like I'm staying here, even if staying here sucks. And there have been times like, and that's why I talk about like our closest friends that we have right now, that we have this really rich community with. Like I said, like there have been times where those relationships have been really hard and have taken a lot of energy to continue to be a part of. And in times where it would have been easier to walk away. And in some seasons, I think maybe we, like on both sides of that relationship, we have kind of given it space and said like, yeah, we're not going to be here for too much. But then ultimately in the end, we just kept coming back and saying, hey, even if this is hard, or even if this is exhausting at times, because being my friend, I think, can be exhausting at times, I'm going to show up and I'm going to stick around. So.
Okay. So like you're back at Bloom and you're behind the scenes tinkering with things.
Yeah.
What's the one big success that you had? Maybe it doesn't have to be at Bloom, but what's the biggest success you've had, biggest successful moment where you plotted something out, you're like, this is going to connect people, this is going to create community, and then you employ it and it's like, oh, that did exactly what I thought it would do.
Yeah. So 2014 was my last year at Bloom. We moved in July of 2014. So it was just over 4 years that I was in Denver. And that spring, we went through the whole like Ash Wednesday, Lenten season, and then Easter. And we had been toying with a lot of things for years, and again, tinkering. And I just loved that, of like, let's try this and see what this does and what this creates in people and all of that. Really, that spring, from Ash Wednesday to Easter, we had put together what felt like the perfect liturgy. Like we came together, I think, with a really shared vision of what we wanted to do and why we wanted to do it, right? Which was, we wanted to create experiences that brought people into the journey of this season of death and resurrection, of going into the desert, into the wilderness, being stripped away, being stripped down, being tested, then going through the roller coaster ride that is Holy Week, and culminating in Easter in a way that it meant something, right? There's this book called, it's called Story. I forget the author. And it's a poet who writes the kind of the narrative of the entire like story of God. He gives an account of kind of the whole Christian narrative from creation all the way to like kind of modern day, if you will. It's fine. Like, it's a fine book. I don't know that I'm recommending it, but the introduction of that book, he says, is that we often invite people into this story as if we're inviting them into the last 5 minutes of a movie and wondering why they're not crying. I think we do that so often in the church, where it's like, hey, here's the end. And then he died. And then we're waiting for people to be like, gasp. And they're just like, what, who, what, why? I don't understand. Like, there's just no context there. And so, and we always felt the same way as a staff, kind of about Easter in the church. So all of that to say is, what we wanted to do is create a journey through these seasons where Easter meant something, where Easter felt like it felt like a big deal. That it wasn't just, we're telling you it's a big deal, right? Like, which as pastors and leaders, we're always doing. We're like, hey, this is a big deal. Don't you think it's a big deal because I said it was a big deal? We wanted it to feel that way. And so throughout that season, we just created we played and we tinkered with the liturgy and the rhythms of our community in a way that I think really created that. So to get into it briefly, one of the things that we did best, I think, as a community was we sang. And to this day, I have a recording of the benediction, one of the benedictions at Bloom, the benediction in the doxology, where we sing the praise God together. And I'll go back to that recording just on my iPhone and listen to it regularly because it's so beautiful. And one of the things that we did during Lent, in this 40 days of stripping away, was we started to strip away pieces of the liturgy. So we stripped away the doxology. So we would go into, and this was like this beautiful part of the liturgy that would always amazing is we'd go into communion. It was rich, this really beautiful, meaningful experience. We'd come together, and then we would sing this doxology, and then we'd have this benediction every week. May the Lord bless you and keep you, right? And week after week in Lent, we would take away one of those elements. And so we would go to communion, and everybody would be ready for this big swelling chorus of voices, and then we'd just say, go in peace. And it would be jarring. It was like jarring to people. They were like, what, why is this? We're not like it. And we made we fought about this on staff. Jamie fought us so much because my idea was we're going to take it away and we're not going to tell people. And we're not going to tell them why unless they come up to us and ask us, right? Because we want it to be jarring. We want it to be surprising. And so people would take away, and you would see we'd do communion, everybody would be ready to sing and receive this blessing, and we'd just say, go in peace. And they'd be like, wait, what? And it was exactly what we wanted. And so each week we would strip away more and more of that to where our service was almost barren, right? Like you'd come in, we'd do maybe a reading, we'd do a sermon, we'd do communion, and you'd have we even, I think, took away maybe less songs. And so it was just smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then on Easter, we brought it all back. And so we meet in the park in the morning at sunrise. Everybody walks to the park. It's one of those beautiful, cold but sunny Denver days. And then we all walk back to the sanctuary, like the disciples walking back to the empty tomb and back to the place where they'd meet. And we go down into the basement where we met, and then we sing the doxology. And you this thing that people had been longing for, been missing for weeks, if not months at that point. And it just came alive, and everybody's voices rang out, and it was beautiful. I get teary-eyed thinking about it. It was this beautiful thing that transformed us. And this book that quote came from earlier by Schmemann, it's called For the Life of the World. And he's talking about the liturgy and Eucharist and the role it plays in the church. He defines liturgy as the things that we do as a corporate people that make us more than we are. And that, I never really gathered that. I used the liturgy, I used to define it as the things that we do together as people, just the things we do together. That's it. But he says it's the things that we do corporately that make that group something more than it is as just a gathering of people. Right. And so in the same way that a marriage, a wedding makes two people together something more than just two people together. It creates a marriage. And so those moments, in that moment, I'm hesitant to speak with such enthusiasm because I get that it can be whatever, but it was transcendent. In that moment, the space between the spiritual and the physical, it got very thin, and it was just beautiful and true and holy. And in that, we became more than 300 people gathered together. We became we were the church.
Well, that's masterful. It's disorientation. reorientation.
Yeah, dude.
Oh.
It was like,
And when you get that, it feels so good. It's like that first spring day after this dreary, dark, snowy winter.
yeah,
You know, like, oh,
yeah, man. It was, and so that was, yeah, that was by far and away.
that's what good rituals should do.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I think so.
amplify the movement of life.
Yeah,
Amplify the human experience.
yeah, man.
All right. Well, I was going to ask you a question. What was the biggest flop that you've had? But
Some messages. Yeah, like they were just. I found that speaking and teaching, as much as I ramble like this and could literally do this all day, the art of the sermon is something I realized that I'm not as good at as I thought I would be. And there were just some messages that I gave that I'm sure were helpful to people, but um, just bombed, dude. Like at least bombed in my mind and in my heart. Like they did not do what I wanted them to do. They didn't become what I wanted them to become. And I still have faith that the words that I said helped people, or they went beyond me and they became more than what I intended them for. But ultimately, like, yeah, dude, there were just some things that they just suck. Yeah.
so you can make a good menu, but preparing for sermons, is that what I'm hearing? Maybe preparing isn't necessarily your thing?
Yeah, I think that it feels counterintuitive to what I was talking about earlier of like my job is to create a space and allow that space to do the work on the people. Whereas a sermon or a message or a speech feels like it, by definition of its nature, is trying to cause a very specific response. And so it always felt like I was supposed to prepare a message in a way that, like, oh, at the end of this, people are supposed to be more committed to Jesus, or they're supposed to be more committed to serving the poor, or they're more, it was always meant to push people in a direction. And that felt counterintuitive to what I wanted to do. Like I didn't ever want to push people. And so I just always struggled with landing it, right? Like I'd have some good ideas of being like, man, I can talk to you about what I think community is. I can talk about that. And I really would have rathered had been like, so I don't know, you do with that what you will. Like I wish that's how I would have ended every sermon, where it would have just been like, I don't know, like here's some words, like take them. Maybe they're good words. Maybe they're not good words. I don't know. I don't know your life. And that some of that has to do with like an insecurity on my part.
No, I think that's hard too, because as I've started doing this podcast stuff,
Yeah.
I had this episode I did about like Christmas really took a life of its own. Like I started with a good idea.
Yeah.
And then I started recording content. And then it's like my idea wasn't where the story wanted to go. But I really had to fight it. I'm like, but that's where I want it to go,
Oh,
but
yeah.
if I had taken it that direction, it would have like just compromised it so much,
Yeah.
So it's like you gotta adapt.
Well, and
that is hard.
And proclaiming a truth to that many different people. Again, I guess I'm so context oriented. Like I could sit down with an individual and like preach, really. Like I can like be like, here's some words, here's some truth, here's some that, because I know you, I know your context. But the idea of being like, hey, all of you 300, 400 people, this is the truth you all need to hear today. Like, I don't know, man. That's overwhelming to me. Again, I think there's some insecurity in that, but at the same time, it's just an art form and a medium that I don't enjoy as much. Like I would much rather create, like I really enjoyed what I got to do at Bloom. I tell you, it's a dream job to get to tinker with like the liturgy that way and the space and with the rhythms. I love it more than anything. That's why I got teary-eyed on Wednesday whenever we did Ash Wednesday, and I got to contribute this part to the liturgy because I was like, oh man, this is something I haven't been able to offer anywhere in a long time, and I'm glad I got to offer it again.
Okay. So I got one more question for you. Yeah. This is actually the question that I originally was like, I should talk to Rusty.
Okay.
Right? But here it is. It's like, so you're a real estate agent now.
Yep.
Has that given you an interesting perspective into people's desire for community?
Yeah, it has. It's really fascinating. It's really interesting to see people's motivations for why they want to live, where they want to live, what they're seeking. It's really interesting seeing you're right, there's this like normal trend for people to, when they're young and single or young and newlyweds, to be in the city. And then this like kind of stereotypical urge, like, oh, they start having kids and then they end up moving to the burbs and finding more space and finding, life in the burbs for what it is. And so it's this natural, like, again, I say stereotypical rhythm because it is feels like it's a stereotype, but at the same time, like stereotypes are based on reality. And maybe that's not always true, but I see it happening time and time again. And so there's that aspect of seeing like why people move where they move. It's also really interesting to see from a completely different side of things, the community of a city and how a city operates, right? So when I moved here, I hated Houston. I was raised to hate Houston. If you live in Dallas, you grow up hating Houston because they teach you to hate Houston. And I love Dallas, so I can say this, but Dallas is a little bit of a like pretentious city. It's a very beautiful city. They've spent a lot of money to make it a beautiful city. And Houston is this really diverse, kind of messy jumble of a city with no zoning laws. And so people can just build whatever they want to build, wherever they want to build it. But so 18 months, just like being like, man, the city sucks. And then having lived here, like my eyes started kind of being open to see more and more of the city. And it kind of went to a place of like, oh, this isn't that bad. And then like really getting into real estate opened my eyes in a way that I go, oh, I love this city. Like there's some really interesting and beautiful things here. And a part of that is, like I said, I work with all kinds of different people. So I've worked with like luxury clients who have more money than I'll ever have. And then I've worked with Section 8 housing clients who are like getting government assistant living. And so I've been in very wealthy neighborhoods and I've been in very low income neighborhoods. And it's really fascinating to see that like the really wealthy people and the low income people, they're all just people. Like in the end, they all want the same things. They all care about the same things. They want somewhere that they can live, where they can be safe and taken care of, and they can, hang their hat at night. And I've then been able to be a part of that. So now, like, I have relationships with people all over the city. I have relationships with businesses across the city, which, like, in turn has kind of transcended to be like, oh, I have a relationship with Houston, very similar to the way I had a relationship with Denver. And I'm very grateful for that I can kind of drive around the city and I can either say, oh, I know people who live in this various neighborhood or this neighborhood or that neighborhood, or I know people who work at this place or work at that place. I think that one way that Houston is really similar to Denver is Houston really doesn't care where you're from as a city. It's very much, you want to be here? Cool, be here. Like you kind of there are some like communal values I think that we as a city share, which are diversity is okay. Now, like obviously we're in the South, so you get some of that, but where you come from, the money you make, it's just not a big deal. We have a lot of things in the city that gather people together in a way that's irrespective of that. Like for instance, today's the first day of the Houston Rodeo, which is like a holiday. Like it's like a 3-week festival and feast of Houston, and it takes over the city, man. People come from all different backgrounds to like be a part of this thing, and it's so cool to see. And like I'm dressed up today because it's Go Texan Day in the Houston Rodeo. So I love it, dude.
Now that's something I've realized that you're very good at. Back to the adaptability thing. When you move to Denver, you're in Denver Broncos. When you move to Texas, you're in Texans,
Yeah, man. You gotta just, find community. I mean, find ways to connect with people, and it's always fun to be, part of a home team. And I love going to Coors Field in Denver and cheering for the Rockies. And dude, like being a part of the Astros and watching them win, even with all the drama that there is around that now, like it's still fun to be a part of it. We all want to be a part of something. And I make no apologies or have no shame of being like, no, like I want to be a part of this. Like I'll go buy t-shirts and stuff just so that I can be a part of the team,
Well, man, I'm really glad I saved that question about you being a realtor for the end. So that's like the perfect place to land the ship here. No matter how much money you got or where you live in the city, we're all just looking for safety. We're all just looking for a home.
Yeah, we just want to belong, be a part of something.
That's community right there.
Yeah, man.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation. I had an absolute blast talking to Rusty and learning a couple things from him. I'm really glad there are people out there like him that like to tinker with community so that people like you and me can find our place in the world out there. Well, for now, stay safe, stay well, pick up the phone, call your friends, connect with each other, and I'll see you right back here in 2 weeks.